Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on the website, leave us a Google review. And if you're watching on the social media, then get involved in the conversation and the comments section. Our email address for any discussion that you want to have with us on the show is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. There's also a podcast version of the show released every Monday at 10 a.m. for those of you who want to get the show on the move, and you can pick them up from all the places you see on the other side of the screen. So let's take a look at this week's property news with our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Hello, Paul. Good morning. And good morning to all our viewers and listeners, wherever you are.
Let's take a look at our first story, which was a big one this week. The major planning overhaul unveiled this week by the new Labour government. The government set to allow construction on an area of Greenbelt cumulatively larger than Surrey to meet Labour's target of getting 1.5 million homes built by 2029. Housing Secretary Angela Rayner unveiled a major planning overhaul that will allow construction on more of the buffer around major towns and cities. She is expecting to widen the definition of what is classed low-quality green belt, or grey belt as it's become known as part of the broader plans to encourage councils to play their part to meet housing need by reaching an ambitious target of 370,000 homes a year. This comes less than a week after the Prime Minister announced the plan for change that sets out the milestone of delivering 1.5 million new homes over 5 years. The government says it will turbocharge growth with new mandatory targets for councils to ramp up house building across the country. The planning overhaul is set to tackle the chronic housing crisis once and for all, and will mean hard graft at work will be rewarded with security at home. So there's a number of proposals, but let's just get the big question out the way. I suppose at least it's preferable to have some kind of plan. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but at least we've got something which is more than we had from the last lot.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, they've got great plans there that they want to implement. 1.5 million homes in their term is ambitious, but it's not impossible, providing things don't get in the way. And that's probably the mildest way of putting it. It's about things not getting in the way. And that's always been the problem. There are a number of things that get in the way, things like shortage of planning officers, consultants, shortage of support from neighbours, supportive of support from the councils, and joining councils, especially when you look at the South Bucks councils and the other counties and areas that are probably more notoriously known as leafy green areas, green belt areas. They don't particularly want to get closer to the bigger towns around them, and then sort of find that they're adjoining, and the gap is shrinking. So that's always been the biggest issue to a large extent for planning, apart from obviously complying with all the planning regulations that they want to do. So what Angela Rayner and of course the Prime Minister is now saying is that they're almost ready to railroad the situation by saying, what doesn't, it's not, one size fits all. It's like, what is available, what can we get, and how quickly can we get it in order to reach their targets. So ambitious targets, probably not impossible, providing they have the support that they say they want to have, and a good thing for the housing market in many different ways, Paul.
Well, they've got 5 key areas that they're looking at, so let's just quickly run through them. Councils will be told to play their part to meet housing need, with new immediate mandatory housing targets for councils to ramp up house building and deliver growth across the country, putting more money in working people's pockets, they say. Areas with the highest unaffordability for housing and great potential for growth will see house building targets increase, while stronger action will ensure councils adopt up-to-date local plans or develop new plans that work for their communities. A new common sense approach will be introduced to the Greenbelt while remaining committed to a brownfield first approach The updated plans will require councils to review their greenbelt boundaries and to meet targets, identifying and prioritising lower quality grey belt land. Any development on Greenbelt must meet strict requirements via a new golden rules, which require developers to provide the necessary infrastructure for local communities, such as nurseries, GP surgeries and transport, etc., as well as premium level social and affordable housing. And lastly, to further tackle the housing crisis, councils and developers will also need to give greater consideration to social rent when building new homes, and local leaders have greater powers to build genuinely affordable homes for those who need them most. So I suppose the key thing really here is, I mean, it's brownfield first. So I mean, they're saying in here that, you know, if somebody comes with a plan to build on brownfield, the automatic default answer should be yes. So that's quite a from where planning departments have been in councils, where there's, you know, so much scrutiny and so much to and fro in changing this and changing that. That's quite a change of culture for a planning office in a local council.
Yes, it is. And the thing with brownfield sites, Paul, just so that, you know, I can share with our viewers and listeners, at least my thoughts on it, my understanding on it, is that some of the brownfield sites are sites that will never ever be replaced again either. So, for example, you know, I get a huge demand for yards, builders' yards, storage yards, and so forth, because the way that we are all working and the way that the business world is working, it requires more storage. For example, let's say a company has 100 vans that are on the road and they need to be housed. It's an impossible task to find those, and it's only the brownfield sites that, you know, may consider those. So sometimes former pub sites, sometimes former other types of sites. Now, then if you're turning those into residential to meet the target, then the problem is that where do they go? They will then want to go onto some greenfield sites and start to rubbish that area and then start again. So there's a very fine line of, you know, whether brownfield are the answer to everything, because some of the things that are on what we call brownfield sites are also things that we cannot find a replacement location for either. So in comes the grey and the greenfield sites. So those are the ones that are probably abutting areas that, you know, have already pretty much, you know, on the line, on the border. So let's say you're living on a development and the neighboring park or the neighboring ground is not used and it's a former farm or something, and that is greenbelt. It may be easier to expand a little bit into that as opposed to taking a brownfield site. And because the demand for brownfield site is as high as it is for residential homes, it's a real tight balance to whether the brownfield sites will be the first port of call. So I think that's something that has to be seriously considered.
Yeah, he says famously this week, Keir Starmer, that he's putting builders, not blockers, first. And of course, that's often been where the problem has been, isn't it? The NIMBYs, they're not in my backyards.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying, is the neighbours. It's the neighbouring piece of land that then says, I'm enjoying the outlook and I don't want any more building there. It's green belt. And of course, the NIMBYs will come in. At the same time, it is the NIMBYs that are saying we're not building enough. We haven't got enough properties. They are business people that may have the opportunities, and they're the ones that are saying, well, we can't build elsewhere. Well, actually, sometimes you've got to start right under your nose, and it's not fun. It's not nice, but it's what has to happen. Now, part of my argument on all of this is that I know it's great to build 1.5 million pound homes across the country, but I often wonder how many homes are actually lying empty, how many homes are part of an infrastructure which is not happening, which they could actually probably force developers' hands, people's hands, and say, look, you know, you're sitting on all of this, it's not going anywhere. How do we get involved in doing that? I know of development sites that have been sitting parked for years and years and years, and they keep sort of fighting away, chipping away, hoping that they get a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And actually, there's probably enough in the drawer if they really look hard, without having to start to say, okay, well, let's give everybody else a planning permission. There's enough already got planning permission. I know of developments where they've been fighting for years over like overage or size or height or thickness or extra units and so forth. And maybe the government should put some input into those and say, you know what, here are sites. Maybe look in the drawer and look at what sites are being, and then go and see those developers and say, right, what do we need to get you up and running? And they could be fast tracking a lot of things, because there's a lot of things. I know of lots of sites that I've been trying to work with developers, and they're all fighting over that little extra bit. For example, a lot of them fight over the Section 106. The Section 106 is an area in planning that allows the council to have certain things. Now, if you have money towards road, money towards schools, money towards this, money towards that, which is fine. It's not saying it shouldn't be done, but sometimes they're so greedy in what they're trying to do. The cost of actually getting the site up against the cost of what they're going to get, it might only be 30, 40,000 pound contribution towards this but that 30, 40, 50,000 pounds, combined with the different areas, could mean 100, 120 to 200,000 pounds in a Section 106. That means that there's a delay in that planning, and because there's a delay in the planning, neither are they building any, or neither are they getting further forward, because they can't turn around and do an agreement with the 106. And so it's sitting there. So I know of sites where they've got 80 units, 50 units, 100 units that are ready, oven ready, because they've already got planning, but are sitting there arguing about Section 106s. And that's been like that for the last 2, 3, 4 years in some of those sites. So, I think the system needs to be looked at, and I think the government will actually find, if they took any guidance or advice from people like me and the layman's, that they've got enough in the drawer to actually kickstart this without having to start looking on new sites.
Yeah, and this actually backs up what you've just been saying, really. Under the current planning framework, just under 1/3 of local authorities have adopted a local plan within the last 5 years, and the number of homes granted planning permission had been also allowed to fall to its lowest level in a decade. And in a bid to encourage change, it's been confirmed that following consultation, areas must commit to timetables for new plans within 12 weeks of the NPPF framework being updated. That's the National Planning Framework updated, or ministers will not hesitate to use existing suite of intervention powers, as they call them, to ensure plans are put in place. The Deputy Prime Minister said, from day one I've been open and honest about the scale of the housing crisis we've inherited. This mission-led government will not shy away from taking the bold and decisive action needed to fix it for good. And of course, therein lies the other issue with this, and that's been the funding. I mean, they've been cutting back on planning departments, councils, because they've had no money. So, having extra planners in was just going to be seen as an extra cost. Let's make people wait months and months and months for decisions because we haven't got the staff. So, again, and I noticed in here they've put £100 million of cash in to next year, so that can be used to hire more staff and consultants, as well as more resources to carry out technical studies and site assessments. So, hopefully, if that money is forthcoming and properly invested in the right people, then what you were saying about the 106s and the blockers that are stopping these things from happening may come forward.
It's a bit like the horse and the cart here, isn't it, Paul? I mean, they want money towards people to come on board, the consultants, the planners, and so forth, but they don't want to build. And if you don't build and get the buildings up and running and get people, into homes, off of the lists that are exhausting funds in the councils otherwise, for example, temporary accommodation, all of that sort of stuff where money's got to go, they could actually relook at how much money they've got and, get on with the job in hand. But it's the left and the right. Every department has their issues. Each one is fighting for its bit in funding. But if they worked collectively and said, right, let's get this out of the way. For example, let's give you an idea. Say highways turns around and says, well, actually, I can't do highways. I've got one highway guy, and he's looking at all of the planning. Well, they could get maybe 4 highway guys to come in and start thinking about what they've got to do. But if they don't give the permission and they don't start building, and the builders don't start earning the money, and those money doesn't pay the taxes, and the taxes don't do, and it goes round, doesn't it? It just goes round and round in circles. But the reality of it is that, they got to start somewhere. So it's at a standstill because nobody is making the next decision. But in the meantime, the meter is still running. They still want to be paid, and they want to get more money so that they can do the jobs, and they want to employ more people so they can get the jobs done quicker. So I think the intervention is a good intervention by the government to try and get this done. But I think that, instead of saying we're now going to allow brownfield, pinkfield, and yellowfield sites to get on, I think they really got to look into the drawer and say, well, actually, we've got planning applications passed. There was a time when the Blues were in, they were saying that if anything hadn't been done in a given year, given period, either they will force it or they'll lose their planning permission on it. So it used to be 5 years, then it came down to 3 years. And then if you stick a shovel in the ground and say you've started your works, then the planning permission was in situ, now used, and it's been sitting there for another 3, 4, 5, 6 years because that developer is saying, well, I actually need to get maybe another 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 units in order to now meet. The other part of this, of course, is that the building costs have gone so stupidly high that it now is not just about the planning and about the land. It's now the cost of building. In some cases, a developer's own land that is now worth less than what it should be because the building cost, the actual physical building cost and labor have gone so sky high that it now doesn't make it worth their while to build. So they look at alternatives that could happen with that site, or leave it until such times as it catches up with itself. So there's lots of other things that the government, and they can't intervene in building costs. They can't go out and tell B&Q, can you chop the prices down? Because B&Q will say it's got nothing to do with you and it's our profit margin. So it's a constant chase, but there are many other areas that have to be looked at as well.
One Labour growth group, the co-chair of that group, Chris Curtis, said Christmas Day, there's another aspect here, this Christmas Day, over 150,000 children will wake up in temporary accommodation. This is unconscionable, which is an interesting word I didn't know existed, and it will happen in large part due to broken planning system for far too long. It's been incapable of providing homes for people who need them. And there is that issue, isn't there? The fact that actually we still have lots of people in hotel rooms and other accommodation.
Yes, the point I was trying to make is that we spend so much money on, short-termism because we're not prepared to really put our head behind what could be long-term. And the long-term has several other areas that, could be affected, which I'm sure we'll cover as the program goes on. But the short-termism is that we spend money on hotels, temporary accommodation, which, if actually channeled correctly, some of those buildings or planning permission. If you look at the cost aspect of it, just look at it, as a business cost. If you look at the cost aspect, and let's say you spend £1 million on, short-term hotel accommodation, but you've got to give away to a builder for £150,000 worth of Section 106, and that gets him moving because that makes the difference between a profit and a not profit. What's easier to spend? It's easier to say to the builder, okay, we'll rule that out, but you've got to give us XYZ accommodation for a period so we can house these homeless people and not spend the money on the hotels. It's not really that difficult, but it's just the case that to keep their jobs, everybody makes it more difficult.
Interesting comments from some of the organisations that in the property industry. So CPRE Chief Executive Roger Mortlock said the broken house building market is to blame for a painfully slow delivery of much needed new homes. When big house builders deliberately limit the supply of new homes to maximise their profits, supercharging the current system will not lead to change that the government is looking for. Now, let's just look at it from the builders' side of it. Those guys that are charging a fortune, as you rightly say now, to get out there and do the jobs. I mean, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because it probably favours the builders to actually limit the supply because that means that there's going to be a premium price on these units.
Yes, but that partly, partly goes against the whole idea in the first place, doesn't it? We don't want to encourage a huge increase in prices at the end product, because that means those first time buyers that we're trying to encourage to get onto the property market, it gets further and further away from it. It's not, and I don't want to say that it's the builders that are saying, oh, well, let's hold this because it's holding them to ransom. What I'm saying is it's not a useful way of dealing with it. If the argument is on a 106, that means that we can get on with the job. And the council need to sort of take a view and say, okay, well, let's get this job done, and get these 60, 50, 100 homes up and running. The chances are that more people are able to then rent, or do buys, or share ownerships, or sell them to housing associates. There's just more opportunity to reduce those numbers that are lying in the homeless section. Those children that are going to wake up on Christmas morning and say, "I'm not living in a home. I'm sitting in a little flat in a bedsit or in a hotel room somewhere." This is not the way the life should be. So at the end of the day, I think it's just that they've got to look at how they can the structure. The idea of getting 1.5 million homes is fantastic. I'm not really sure that we actually need to eat into more land. I think there's plenty in the drawer, and I think they just got to take a more sensible, pragmatic approach, and do a deal with the builders and get the job on.
Let's just hear a little bit more of what Roger had to say. It's very interesting, actually. The government's plans risk a huge hike in the number of unaffordable, car-dependent homes, building on England's 1.2 million shovel-ready brownfield sites would do far more to unlock growth, regenerate communities, and provide sustainable, generally affordable new homes. We welcome the commitment to local plans and affordable homes. However, local authorities responsible for delivering new homes will be swamped with speculative applications on high-quality greenbelt and farmland. Inevitably, many of these will be approved and meet nationally imposed standards. So he's saying really what you're saying. There's 1.2 million brownfield sites that are shovel-ready, ready to go, and he feels that probably will be enough. But he also mentions the fact that the grey belt needs to be much more clearly defined and exclude working farms. It will undermine the green belt, one of this country's most successful spatial protections, with huge potential to help address the climate and nature emergencies. So he's saying really we need some much more clear guidelines on grey belt. We don't want to be building on working farms, and actually the 1.2 million brownfield sites might well be enough.
Yes, and there's your answer. We want to do 1.5 million homes. We've got 1.2 brownfield shovel ready, ready to go. So they need to negotiate with those people. And then if there's others, for example, lots of councils have loads and loads of homes that are lying empty that they haven't repaired. They should maybe get into some deals with the local developers, local entrepreneurs, and say, come on in, put some of your money in, and let's get this show on the road together instead of trying to do it all by myself. And so, I think the reality is that we've got enough in there. We've always had enough. And I don't know how many times I've said this on our programs, that half of the stock that they need is probably stock that they've not used and is not repaired. I mean, so many homes that belong to the council are sitting there empty and not been dealt with. They should put that time and energy into those, and at least house some of that list that is on their list, instead of paying hoteliers or putting them into hotels, and saying, here you are, can you just do this job for us?
I can see a big problem here, though, Joe, because if you think about it logically, if you're a builder, people say location, location, location. And the point is, clearly, if you've got a site that's greenbelt that could actually be something the council might grant on, I'd much rather put a proposal together where I can get a premium price for the products I'm building on that land, because the land is in a good location, it's in a good place, it's got a good vista and all the rest of it. Much more profitable potentially for a builder to build on a green stroke grey builds area, rather than to build on a brownfield site where you've got a co-op next door or an MOT garage the other side.
Well, I mean, I tend to disagree a little bit there, because the problem with that is going to be that when you got a co-op another site next door, part of the movement today, especially in the younger generation, is about communication, and those sites may be blocks of flats. They may not be good blocks of flats for families. I agree with that part, but they might be perfectly sound to get certainly single parent families or youngsters that are homeless, youngsters who are trying to get onto the ladder, who need to be in town centre locations next to the co-op or whatever, and be accessible to communication, transport, and other things. Because when you do build outside, you have to add all of that. I mean, I don't know if you feel that, but I know that I'm traveling around the country and there are more roads with road repair signs on there than there are actually people that are working on there. And that causes a lot of problem. The infrastructures are now, way too shallow for the number. So if they are going to build on the green belt, they're going to have to create proper infrastructures, and that's going to be disruption. So it's not just about that. I believe that there is probably enough in the drawer if they look carefully, and they should bring the builders, developers to the table and say, what is it that you need? What is it that we need? Let's draw up a line here and agree a deal and get on with it. I think we'll fast track that far, far quicker. I mean, if he wants me to be on his panel, Mr. Starmer, I'll send you my number. We're happy to do that.
You heard it here first. Yeah, I can see planning departments being inundated with loads of prospective greenbelt proposals. That's my worry. But let's just listen to what Ian Barnett, who's the National Land Director at Leaders Romans Group, he said, what a difference a year makes. The NPPF changes announced provide a new framework for the industry to work to, and a flurry of activity on LinkedIn as everyone seeks to understand the key points and how they will affect their projects. There have been many grand announcements in my time in planning and development. The priority has always been to build enough houses for the country's population in the right places and in a manner that protects the most valuable landscapes and environmentally sensitive areas. So are the latest announcements any different to what we've heard before? On paper, yes, absolutely. The conviction and tone, as well as the content, does suggest that this time at least, the government is serious. This new opportunity for development and housing delivery, it has to be worked through, and it's down to them to do that, clearly. While some would like to have seen more in terms of strategic planning, at least there's a new window of opportunity for many sites that are suitable for development and which have been held by inefficiencies and a lack of resources, meddling local politics and NIMBYism to come forward. Delivering 1.5 million homes in the first term is ambitious and utterly unrealistic under the previous planning system. The time for delivery is here, and it's the responsibility of everyone in the industry, developers, landowners, planners and local authorities to do what's needed. The framework is there, but it will take time to bed in, and what we need now, more than anything, after a new update for the last two Christmases, is stability so we can get on with the task ahead. And that's a good point at the end there, isn't it? Everybody does suddenly start needing to work together, but will that ever be possible given that everyone's got their own personal agendas?
Well, unless you bring them to the table and actually exhaust what those personal agendas are, then to be honest with you, we're just going to go round and round the table here. I mean, this government, another government, and anybody else that wants to come to the table will continue to have that discussion. I think, if you look at the real world of negotiation, you need to get them to the table and say to them, right, what is it that we can do to help you, which means it will help us, and get this moving fast and fast track this. It's not an impossible task. It's just that everybody has their own agendas, and those agendas need to be addressed at the table. That's my view on it, and I think it can be done. We've been negotiators. I've been a negotiator for pretty much all my life, and I know that if you don't, bring both parties to the table, we're not going to get anywhere fast. And I think that's what's going to happen here.
Well, it's certainly going to be interesting keeping an eye on the developments of this national planning framework. And of course, that's what Property Matters is here for each week. And we'll be grateful of your company again for another Property Matters very, very soon. Thanks for watching.